Caldwell Hollow, blood, faith, and silence. Deep within the remote highlands of the Ozark Mountains, where thick mist settles into ancient valleys and sunlight struggles to reach the forest floor, there exists a place that maps barely acknowledge. A place where roads dissolve into dirt. Where radio signals vanish without warning. Where the outside world seems to lose interest. And where time itself appears reluctant to move forward. Long before satellite imagery and paved highways, this region was defined by its inaccessibility. Steep ridges, tangled forests, and narrow passes made travel slow and dangerous. In winter, snow isolated entire valleys for months. In summer, dense fog swallowed trails and erased landmarks. For outsiders, these mountains were obstacles. For those who lived within them, they were shields. By the late 19th century, federal authorities rarely ventured into these elevations. Census workers avoided them. Inspectors postponed visits. Law enforcement preferred to patrol easier terrain. What lay hidden in the highlands was considered someone else's problem. And often, no one's responsibility. Tucked between three county borders, in a depression so narrow it rarely appeared on official maps, was a secluded valley known to a handful of locals as Caldwell Hollow. To reach it, one had to abandon wagon roads miles away and continue on foot through twisting forest paths. The final descent followed a narrow ravine where sound seemed to disappear and even birds grew silent. Those who entered often described the same sensation. A feeling of crossing an invisible boundary. A sense that the valley was sealed off from ordinary life. The Hollow story began in 1823, when two brothers, Isaiah and Jeremiah Caldwell, arrived in the Ozarks after fleeing religious persecution in Scotland. They were devout, strict, uncompromising. Their faith taught them that purity was sacred, that bloodlines were vessels of divine favor, and that outsiders threatened spiritual corruption. When they reached the mountains, they believed they had found refuge. Here, they could practice their beliefs without interference. Here, they could build a community untouched by what they considered moral decay. Their first home was a crude cabin of split logs and packed clay. It stood alone in the valley, surrounded by towering trees and constant fog. But it would not remain alone for long. Over the following decades, the brothers' children married each other's children. Their grandchildren did the same. New cabins appeared. Fields were cleared. Gardens were planted. By mid-century, Caldwell Hollow had become a settlement. Not of neighbors, but of relatives. Every family connected. Every lineage intertwined. Every marriage internal. As the years passed, isolation became tradition. Children were raised to distrust outsiders. Stories were told about corrupt cities. About sinful strangers. About divine punishment awaiting those who left. Few ever did. Those who tried were quietly discouraged. Sometimes shunned. Sometimes erased from conversation entirely. By the 1890s, fewer than a dozen people in surrounding towns had ever set foot in the Hollow. And none had stayed long. In the spring of 1895, that changed. A young physician named Dr. Thomas Hargrove was assigned to survey medical conditions in Missouri's most remote districts. He was methodical, educated, idealistic, recently graduated, and eager to prove himself. His orders were simple. Travel. Observe. Document. Report. But Caldwell Hollow was not on any official list. Hargrove learned of it only through vague references in county records and hesitant whispers from locals. A strange place, one man told him. Best avoided. That warning only increased his curiosity. In April of that year, Hargrove began his journey. The wagon road ended abruptly. He continued on horseback. Then on foot. Carrying medical instruments, notebooks, and supplies. For 2 days, he followed fading trails. On the third, he descended into the valley. The path narrowed as I entered, he later wrote in his journal. The trees leaned inward. The air thickened. And the sound of my footsteps seemed to vanish. When he finally reached the settlement, he stopped and stared. Before him stood a cluster of weathered cabins, their roofs sagging, their walls darkened by decades of rain and smoke. Thin columns of mist drifted between them. No church. No school. No store. Only homes. And fields. And faces watching from behind doors. The residents did not greet him. They studied him. Men with identical brows. Women with familiar eyes. Children who looked like reflections of one another. It was as if the same few faces had been copied and rearranged. Again. And again. And again. Then Hargrove noticed something else. A faint bluish tint in many of their skin tones. Subtle. Almost imperceptible. But consistent. Lips. Fingertips. Cheeks. A discoloration he could not immediately explain. At the time, he did not know it was the visible sign of a rare blood disorder. He only knew it was wrong. As he unpacked his equipment and introduced himself, no one offered him food. No one offered him shelter. Only silence. And watchful eyes. And a growing realization that he had stepped into a place the modern world had forgotten. And that what he was about to uncover had been hidden for generations. The trade of innocence. During his first days in Caldwell Hollow, Dr. Thomas Hargrove focused on observation. He did not ask difficult questions. He did not challenge beliefs. He listened. He watched. He recorded. He understood that trust, once broken, would never be restored in a place like this. The community had survived for generations by avoiding scrutiny. Outsiders were temporary. Secrets were permanent. So Hargrove moved slowly. He treated minor injuries. He examined children. He offered medicine. He accepted invitations to shared meals. And little by little, suspicion softened into tolerance. As he became more familiar with daily life in the hollow, one figure emerged as central to everything. Ezekiel Caldwell. The spiritual leader. The final authority. The interpreter of God's will. Ezekiel lived in the largest cabin at the center of the settlement. It doubled as a meeting hall and prayer house. On Sundays and holy days, families gathered there to listen as he preached from worn, hand-copied scriptures. His voice was calm. Measured. Hypnotic. He spoke often of purity. Of sacrifice. Of divine favor. And of the dangers of contamination from the outside world. To challenge Ezekiel was to challenge God himself. No one dared. Hargrove noticed that people deferred to him instinctively. Questions were redirected to Ezekiel. Decisions waited for Ezekiel. Even medical matters were first brought to Ezekiel. When a child fell ill, parents prayed before seeking treatment. When deformities appeared, Ezekiel was consulted. Not a doctor. Not a midwife. A preacher. It was during his third week in the hollow that Hargrove noticed something troubling. Some children were missing. He had examined several families earlier in his stay. Now, their youngest members were gone. No graves. No funerals. No mourning rituals. Simply, absence. When he asked where they had gone, the answers were vague. Sent to serve. Called to purpose. Taken by God's will. The phrases were repeated. Rehearsed. Empty. The truth emerged late one evening. Hargrove had been recording notes in his temporary quarters when he heard footsteps outside. A hesitant knock followed. When he opened the door, a young woman stood in the fading light. Her name was Sarah Caldwell. Her hand shook. Her eyes were red. She asked if she could speak privately. Inside, she sat rigidly on a wooden stool. For several minutes, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "I've lost 3. Hargrove leaned forward. "Lost?" he asked. She shook her head. "Given." Through halting words, she explained. 3 of her children had been born with visible abnormalities. 1 with twisted limbs. 1 with blue-tinged skin. 1 who struggled to speak. Each time, Ezekiel had declared them chosen. Each time, ceremonies were held. Each time, they were taken away. She had been told they were serving God. That their sacrifice would protect the family. That questioning it would bring divine punishment. Then she told him what she had discovered. Months earlier, she had overheard men discussing payments. Supplies. Deliveries. Routes. And names of distant farms. Her children had not been blessed. They had been sold. Hargrove documented her account immediately. Over the following days, he spoke quietly with others. At first, no one admitted anything. Fear ruled the hollow. But eventually, fragments emerged. Whispers. Hints. Half-confessions. By the 1870s, Ezekiel had created a system. When a child was born, he evaluated them. Not spiritually. Economically. Severe deformities meant higher value. Unusual appearance meant more interest. Cognitive impairment meant easy control. These children were catalogued, prepared, and transferred. They were sent to remote farms seeking cheap labor, traveling exhibitions advertising human wonders, early medical institutions looking for test subjects, wealthy collectors fascinated by anomalies. Payment came in many forms. Money, tools, livestock, seeds, medicine, clothing. Everything the hollow could not produce itself. Years later, letters would confirm it all. Correspondence between Ezekiel and buyers. Negotiated prices. Delivery dates. Replacement requests. One letter referred to a child as defective stock. Another as a high curiosity value. Human beings reduced to merchandise. The hollow's location made it possible. Straddling 3 counties, it existed in a jurisdictional void. No single authority oversaw it. When rumors surfaced, they were dismissed. Mountain superstition. Rural exaggeration. Not worth investigating. Ezekiel understood this. And exploited it. He preached obedience. He punished doubt. He isolated dissenters. Those who questioned transfers were labeled spiritually weak. Some were publicly shamed. Others were quietly ostracized. A few simply disappeared. Hargrove now realized something chilling. The deformities he documented were not only medical tragedies. They were commodities. Each abnormality increased a child's market value. Each birth was a potential transaction. Each family unknowingly participated. The hollow had become something far darker than an isolated religious community. It was a marketplace. Disguised as faith. Hidden behind scripture. Protected by ignorance. And fueled by silence. And at its center stood Ezekiel Caldwell. A man who had transformed devotion into profit. And suffering into currency. By the beginning of summer in 1895, Dr. Thomas Hargrove had spent nearly 3 months in Caldwell Hollow. What had begun as a routine health survey had transformed into a comprehensive investigation. He rose before dawn. He visited homes one by one. He recorded family histories. He examined every willing resident. He sketched genealogies by lantern light. Slowly, a horrifying pattern emerged. The same surnames repeated. The same marriages recurred. The same bloodlines folded inward on themselves. Generation after generation. Without interruption. Without outsiders. Without renewal. Hargrove began assembling a family tree that stretched back to Isaiah and Jeremiah Caldwell. As he filled page after page, he noticed something unsettling. By the 3rd generation, nearly every branch intersected. By the fourth, separation had vanished. Parents were cousins. Grandparents were siblings. Aunts were mothers. Uncles were fathers. The community had become biologically enclosed. The medical consequences were unavoidable. Among the 63 residents, Hargrove identified 17 with severe cognitive impairment. 23 exhibited chronic cyanosis, the blue discoloration caused by oxygen-deficient blood. 31 showed major skeletal deformities, spinal curvatures, malformed joints, extra fingers and toes, stunted growth, fragile bones. Many suffered multiple conditions simultaneously. But statistics told only part of the story. Behind every number was a child. A life. A future already compromised. One of the most severe cases was 12-year-old Joshua Caldwell. Joshua was the son of half-siblings. His birth had been difficult. His infancy, fragile. His childhood, painful. His skin carried a constant bluish hue. 6 fingers grew from each hand. His chest rose unevenly. Every breath was labor. Joshua could not run. Could not play. Could not climb. Even walking short distances left him gasping. At night, his mother often slept beside him, afraid he would stop breathing. Hargrove examined him carefully. He documented a congenital heart defect, underdeveloped lungs, circulatory failure. With proper surgical intervention, Hargrove wrote, "This child might survive into adulthood. Here, he will not." Joshua was not alone. Every family had a similar story. A child who never learned to speak. A daughter who could not stand. A son who died before his first birthday. By 1895, infant mortality in the Hollow had reached nearly 40%. 4 times the national average. Those who survived faced lifelong hardship. Chronic pain. Fatigue. Neurological disorders. Respiratory failure. Yet within the community, these realities were interpreted through religion. Not as biological consequences, but as divine judgment. Or divine favor. If a child was healthy, God was pleased. If a child was sick, faith was insufficient. If a child was deformed, it was a message. Nowhere was this more tragically illustrated than in the story of Anna Caldwell. Anna was born in 1878 with severe craniofacial abnormalities. Her jaw was misshapen. Her nasal passages restricted. Eating was difficult. Breathing was painful. Doctors in nearby towns said she would not survive infancy. Her mother, Rebecca, refused to accept that fate. She fed Anna by hand, monitored her breathing, stayed awake through countless nights. Against all odds, Anna lived. Year after year. Growing slowly. Struggling constantly. But alive. For 7 years, Rebecca protected her daughter. Then Ezekiel intervened. He declared that Anna's survival was proof of divine selection. That her condition marked her as sacred. That she was destined for a higher purpose. A ceremony was held. Prayers were spoken. Rebecca protested. She wept. She begged. But she was overruled. Anna was taken. She was sold to a traveling exhibition. Advertised as the Blue Girl of Missouri. Displayed in tents. Paraded on stages. Observed by crowds who paid to stare. She became an object. Not a child. Rebecca never saw her again. Anna died at 16 from respiratory failure. Her body buried far from home. Her family never informed. Modern geneticists would later recognize what had happened in Caldwell Hollow. The founder effect. When a small population reproduces within itself, rare genetic traits become common. Recessive disorders multiply. Defects accumulate. Health collapses. One such disorder was methemoglobinemia. a recessive condition that prevents blood from carrying oxygen efficiently. It produced the blue coloration Hargrove observed. In the general population, it was almost non-existent. In Caldwell Hollow, it was widespread. But in 1895, none of this was understood. There was no genetics, no DNA, no molecular biology, only observation and suffering. Hargrove's notebooks filled rapidly. Diagrams, measurements, case studies. He recorded patterns decades before science could explain them. His work would later become foundational in early genetic research. Yet even as he documented, he struggled morally. He was witnessing slow destruction. And he was nearly powerless to stop it. Every evening, he reviewed his notes. Each page another tragedy. Another lost opportunity. Another child sentenced by circumstance. He began to understand something profound. Caldwell Hollow was not simply isolated. It was collapsing inward. Biologically. Emotionally. Spiritually. And unless something intervened soon, the bloodline would destroy itself. By early autumn of 1895, Dr. Thomas Hargrove understood that his work in Caldwell Hollow could no longer remain confined to notebooks and private reflections. What he had documented was not merely a medical anomaly. It was systematic abuse, institutionalized exploitation, and generational harm. Wrapped in scripture, protected by isolation, sustained by fear. For months, he had balanced two roles: physician and silent witness. But silence had become impossible. Every examination revealed another broken body. Every interview exposed another stolen childhood. Every ledger hinted at another transaction. In September, Hargrove began assembling his final report. He worked late into the night by lamplight, sorting testimonies, organizing medical data, cross-referencing correspondence, mapping family trees. He copied Ezekiel's letters, photographed transaction records, transcribed sermons, and attached sworn statements from former members. On September 28, 1895, he sent a sealed package to the Missouri State Board of Health. Inside was nearly 300 pages of evidence. Medical findings, proof of trafficking, witness accounts, financial documentation, a complete portrait of exploitation. In his cover letter, he wrote, "I cannot in good conscience continue observation. The children of this community are being harmed. Their suffering is not accidental. It is organized." For weeks, nothing happened. Autumn settled over the mountains. Leaves fell. Frost appeared. And life in Caldwell Hollow continued as if untouched. Ezekiel still preached. Transfers were still planned. Ceremonies were still held. Hargrove feared his report had been ignored. That bureaucracy would bury it. That distance would protect the hollow once again. Then, in early November, riders arrived. County sheriffs, state physicians, child welfare agents, representatives from 3 jurisdictions. They carried warrants, medical orders, and arrest authorizations. On November 12, 1895, the convoy descended into Caldwell Hollow. Wagons creaked along narrow paths. Horses snorted in cold air. Uniforms stood out against the grey forest. It was the largest outside presence the valley had ever seen. Residents gathered silently. From doorways. From fields. From behind trees. Fear spread quickly. Some families fled deeper into the mountains. Others barricaded themselves inside cabins. A few gathered around Ezekiel's home, seeking guidance. Ezekiel was ready. For years, he had warned his followers of worldly persecution. He had framed outsiders as enemies, authorities as agents of corruption. The arrival confirmed everything he had preached. he confronted the officials at the center of the settlement. Bible in hand. Voice calm. Eyes defiant. He questioned their authority. Invoked divine covenant. Declared the hollow beyond human law. But this time, scripture was not enough. Searches began immediately. Cabins were inspected. Records seized. Children examined. Hidden rooms discovered. Locked storage sheds opened. Inside were documents. Shipping crates. Restraints. Personal effects belonging to missing children. The illusion collapsed. One case broke many families. 9-year-old Elijah Caldwell. Scheduled for transfer in spring. Marked as high value. Authorities summoned his parents, Joseph and Mary. They showed them financial ledgers. Receipts. Correspondence. Their son had already been priced. Mary collapsed. Joseph denied it. Accused officials of lying. Then he read the signatures. Recognized Ezekiel's handwriting. Saw the payments. Something in him shattered. Across the hollow, similar scenes unfolded. Parents realizing they had been deceived. That sacrifices were lies. That devotion had been weaponized. That their children had been sold. 17 children were identified as requiring immediate medical evacuation. Many were malnourished. Some critically ill. Several had never seen a doctor before. Temporary medical tents were erected. Treatments began. For some, it was already too late. 28 previous transfers were documented. Names. Dates. Destinations. Efforts to locate them began immediately. Ezekiel Caldwell and 2 senior elders were arrested that evening. Charged with trafficking. Conspiracy. Child endangerment. Fraud. False imprisonment. As he was led away, Ezekiel did not resist. He simply quoted scripture. Promised divine judgment. Claimed martyrdom. Few listened. The legal proceedings that followed lasted months. They established precedents that reshaped Missouri law. Religious freedom, the courts ruled, did not excuse exploitation. Faith did not override child welfare. Doctrine did not justify harm. Meanwhile, Caldwell Hollow dissolved. Without Ezekiel's authority, the structure collapsed. Families dispersed. Some relocated to towns. Others changed their names. Many tried to erase their past. By 1900, the valley was abandoned. Cabins rotted. Fields reclaimed. Paths disappeared. The forest closed over everything. As if trying to forget. Dr. Hargrove remained. He followed survivors. Tracked missing children. Published his findings. Advocated for reform. His 1899 study became one of the earliest longitudinal examinations of isolated communities. But in private letters, he admitted something. That he still wondered. How many stories were never told? How many children were never found? How many hollows like Caldwell still existed? Hidden. Silent. Waiting. And that question still echoes today.